the 1930s. A decade of global turmoil. The Great Depression gripped the world. In Europe, a dark cloud gathered as Hitler's Germany rose in power. Across the Pacific, another storm brewed. Japan, a nation on the rise, clashed with the established power of the United States. The seeds of conflict had been sown, and the world watched with bated breath. Both nations eyed each other with suspicion. Japan, hungry for resources and driven by a militaristic government, looked to expand its empire. The United States, a champion of democracy and international order, saw this ambition as a threat. The Pacific Ocean, once a vast expanse separating two powers, became a potential battleground. The relationship between these two powers had long been complex. From the moment Commodore Perry sailed his black ships into Tokyo Bay in 1853, forcing Japan to open its doors to the world, an uneasy coexistence defined their interactions. Now, as the 1930s unfolded, this fragile peace teetered on the brink. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change the course of history. Japan in the 20th century was a nation transformed. The Meiji Restoration had set the stage for rapid modernization, propelling Japan from a feudal society into an industrial powerhouse. This transformation was not just technological but also ideological, as Japan sought to redefine its place in the world. Gone were the days of the shogun and samurai. The old ways of the warrior class had given way to a new era of industrialists and military leaders who envisioned a different future for Japan. In their place stood a modern military power, eager to assert itself on the world stage. The Japanese military, now equipped with advanced weaponry and technology, was ready to challenge the established powers. Fueling this ambition was a potent cocktail of nationalism, militarism, and economic necessity. National pride surged as Japan's leaders promoted the idea of a unique Japanese spirit, superior to that of the West. Japan, a small island nation, lacked the vast resources of its Western counterparts. Its geographical limitations meant that it had to look elsewhere to sustain its burgeoning industries and growing population. To fuel its growing industries and support its expanding population, it looked beyond its borders, particularly towards the resource-rich regions of mainland Asia. The vast lands of China and Southeast Asia were seen as ripe for exploitation. This expansionist drive was bolstered by a powerful sense of national destiny. The concept of Hakko Ichiu, or 8 corners of the world under one roof, became a rallying cry for those who believed in Japan's divine mission to lead Asia. Many in Japan believed they were destined to lead Asia, to liberate it from Western imperialism and usher in a new era of Asian dominance. This belief was not just confined to the military but permeated all levels of society. The military, wielding increasing influence in Japanese politics, saw expansion as the solution to both economic woes and perceived threats to national security. They argued that Japan's survival depended on its ability to secure resources and strategic territories. They argued that Japan needed a sphere of co-prosperity in Asia, a euphemism for an empire under Japanese control. This Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere was presented as a benevolent initiative, but in reality, it was a guise for imperial domination. This empire, they claimed, would secure vital resources, provide living space for Japan's growing population, and ensure its rightful place as the dominant power in Asia. The vision was grand, but it set Japan on a collision course with the existing world order, leading to conflicts that would shape the course of history. The first ominous step in Japan's march toward empire came in 1931 with the Mukden Incident. A staged explosion near a Japanese-owned railway in Manchuria, then a region of China, provided the pretext for a swift and brutal invasion. The Japanese army, acting with ruthless efficiency, quickly overran Manchuria, encountering little resistance from the weakened Chinese forces. The world watched in shock as Japan, in defiance of international law and League of Nations condemnation, established a puppet state in Manchuria, renaming it Manchukuo. This brazen act of aggression sent shockwaves through the international community, signaling Japan's willingness to use military force to achieve its goals. The seizure of Manchuria was more than just a land grab. It was a strategic masterstroke. Rich in resources, particularly coal and iron, Manchuria provided Japan with a vital industrial base for its growing military machine. It also served as a springboard for further expansion into China, bringing Japan into direct conflict with the interests of the United States and other Western powers. Section 4. The China Syndrome, Japan's war machine rolls on. Emboldened by its success in Manchuria, Japan turned its attention south towards China proper. The Japanese military, driven by a desire to expand its empire and secure resources, saw China as a vast territory ripe for conquest. The leadership in Tokyo believed that controlling China would not only provide them with the raw materials they desperately needed, but also establish Japan as the dominant power in Asia. In 1937, a minor clash between Japanese and Chinese troops near the Marco Polo Bridge near Beijing spiraled into a full-scale invasion. This incident, seemingly insignificant at first, quickly escalated as both sides mobilized their forces. The Japanese used this as a pretext to launch a massive military campaign, aiming to subdue China swiftly. Japanese forces, armed with superior firepower and driven by imperial ambition, swept through eastern China, capturing major cities like Shanghai and Nanjing. The Japanese military strategy was ruthless and efficient, utilizing advanced weaponry and tactics to overwhelm Chinese defenses. The fall of these key cities marked significant victories for Japan, but also set the stage for further atrocities. The rape of Nanjing, a horrifying episode of mass murder and brutality inflicted upon the civilian population, shocked the world and further tarnished Japan's image in the eyes of the international community. Over a period of 6 weeks, Japanese soldiers committed unspeakable acts of violence, leaving a lasting scar on the city and its people. This atrocity highlighted the brutal nature of Japan's military campaign and drew widespread condemnation. The invasion of China, a vast country with a determined population, proved to be a much tougher proposition than the conquest of Manchuria. Chinese forces, though initially unprepared, quickly organized a fierce resistance. The vastness of the Chinese landscape and the resilience of its people meant that Japan faced a prolonged and grueling conflict. Despite their early successes, Japanese forces soon found themselves bogged down in a costly and protracted war of attrition. The initial rapid advances gave way to drawn-out battles, with Japanese troops struggling against both the Chinese military and guerrilla fighters. The harsh terrain and logistical challenges further compounded their difficulties. The conflict in China would drain Japanese resources, tie down its army, and further escalate tensions with the United States, which viewed Japan's actions with increasing alarm. The prolonged war strained Japan's economy and military, leading to shortages and weakening their overall strategic position. Meanwhile, the United States, concerned about Japanese expansionism, began to take steps that would eventually lead to a direct confrontation. The stage was set for a showdown between the rising power of Japan and the established might of America. As Japan continued its aggressive expansion, the United States prepared for a potential conflict, setting the scene for one of the most significant and devastating wars in history. Section 5. The sleeping giant stirs, America takes notice. Across the Pacific, the United States watched Japan's actions with growing concern. Americans, still grappling with the economic turmoil of the Great Depression, were initially hesitant to involve themselves in foreign conflicts. The horrors of World War I, still fresh in the collective memory, fueled a strong isolationist sentiment. However, Japan's increasingly aggressive behavior, coupled with its alliance with Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, raised alarm bells in Washington. The Roosevelt administration, though initially reluctant to abandon its policy of neutrality, recognized the threat posed by Japanese expansionism. The fall of Manchuria, followed by the invasion of China, convinced many in the American government that Japan's ambitions posed a direct threat to American interests in the Pacific. The United States, with its territorial possessions in the Philippines and strategic interests in China, could not remain indifferent to Japan's bid for regional hegemony. Section 6. Oil and embargoes, economic warfare begins. To curb Japan's aggression, the United States, along with other Western powers, imposed a series of economic sanctions. These measures were designed to cripple Japan's ability to sustain its military campaigns in Asia. The most significant of these was an embargo on vital war materials, most notably oil. Oil was the lifeblood of modern military machinery, and without it, Japan's war efforts would grind to a halt. Japan, heavily reliant on imports for its oil supply, was dealt a severe blow. The country had few natural resources of its own and depended on foreign oil to fuel its navy, air force, and industrial sectors. The embargo, a calculated gamble by the United States, was intended to force Japan to reconsider its expansionist policies and seek a diplomatic solution. American leaders hoped that economic pressure would bring Japan to the negotiating table. However, the embargo had the opposite effect. Instead of backing down, Japan saw the embargo as a direct threat to its national survival and honor. It fueled resentment in Japan, strengthening the hand of the militarists who argued that war with the United States was inevitable. These leaders believed that Japan had no choice but to secure its own sources of oil and other resources through conquest. They portrayed the embargo as an act of economic strangulation, aimed at keeping Japan weak and subservient to Western powers. Propaganda efforts intensified, painting the United States as an aggressor trying to undermine Japan's rightful place in the world. The Japanese government, caught between its dependence on American oil and its imperial ambitions, faced a stark choice: back down and abandon its dreams of empire, or risk war with the United States to secure the resources it desperately needed. The stakes were incredibly high, and the path they chose would shape the future of the entire world. The decision they made would have catastrophic consequences for the world. The ensuing conflict would lead to unprecedented destruction and loss of life, altering the course of history forever.